Hey guys, sorry I'm a couple minutes late. I always tell myself I'm not going to wait until the last minute to get everything ready, and then I went to the gym. I'm just waiting to confirm sound. Can anyone hear me? I haven't. Just waiting to confirm sound. Can anyone? All right, we're good. Okay, welcome to another A Murderous Heart Live. It's been a minute. Mm, yeah, I was sick back to back with a cold and then the flu. But I'm all better and feisty again. I was better last week, but then it was Thanksgiving, so I wasn't going to do a live the day after Thanksgiving when everyone's in a food coma. Anyway, I we have a few questions that I think were left over from last week. But first, let me touch on the Lori Vallow Daybell news. So she was found competent to stand trial, not surprisingly, because she wants to be competent, so, and I've always said, you have to have mental health issues to aid in the murder of your children and, go on a murder spree to begin with. Like, there has to be some kind of mental illness, but that doesn't mean you're incompetent to stand trial. There are lots of people in prison with significant mental health issues. Now, Eileen Ware knows something like that. Like, there were really significant mental health issues, and I've talked about her before. That whole case really kind of made me lean largely against the death penalty because I don't think that she was competent. She wanted to die. But anyway, but in the case of like Lori and Chad, they experienced every privilege, every advantage. So, I'm ambivalent at best. But anyway, so, when she doesn't want to be found incompetent, she presents as competent. So she was found competent to stand trial, and then the judge gave her the green light on her being able to represent herself. I talked about that before. If she, it seemed pretty obvious if she was found competent to stand trial, like, what could the judge do? So that said, I think it's going to be one of the most interesting trials I've ever followed, and not just because my family wasn't directly involved in the murder of Charles. More tangential, but yeah, I in the last live I talked about, and I don't mean any like shade to Colby. Just looking at this, like, well, okay, what precipitated this dramatic turn of events? And it seems pretty obvious. It was the interview that she did with Colby. Now, in my industry, we like to say correlation does not mean causation. So two things can happen at the same time, but that doesn't mean that one caused the other. Like, they've correlated, like, divorce rates in Michigan with the tide, and things like that to kind of drive home that point. But in this case, I do think that there is at minimum a suggested causation, because she was kind of, Lori is always going to be full of surprises. She's always going to play to the media. I've always said I think it's more her covering up embarrassment than enjoying the attention. um, but in this case, like, there was a dramatic turn of events, and I won't go into it in detail because I talked about it in my last live. But when I looked at the docket, like the history of like just the course of history after her interview with Colby. And it was like that week, things started to go haywire. And I talked a little bit about this the last time, but when the public defender's office filed to withdraw, they specifically referenced a case that, and now I don't have it in front of me, but essentially it was about like someone saying something to a public defender that put someone else's case in jeopardy. Like there was a conflict of interest because the public defender's office was also representing this other person. So the only other person with an open case that I know of is Colby, and that's just because I forget if it was with prejudice. I think it was with prejudice. So the RAPE case against his then estranged wife, they've since reconciled. That could be reinstated, resurrected. I highly doubt that it will, but I suspect that what may have happened is after that interview with Colby, and like I said, you could tell she was under duress. She really didn't want this public, but she wanted to talk to Colby. I do wonder if she said something that compromise, that like maybe in anger or whatever, said something about his case, or said something about him and that history or whatever, and may have put it introduced that conflict of interest. Whatever it wasn't Lori's initiative. It was the public defender's office. Then after they filed, their whole like request to withdraw, then that's when she said, I just want to represent myself. And that is pretty on brand for Lori. Is like, oh, well, you're not rejecting me. I can't accept that I may have made a mistake that put my case in jeopardy. I'm rejecting you. I don't need a public defender's office anyway. So I think, like they immediately assigned her multiple attorneys. And I think they were probably hoping that she would relent, but at that point, her mind was made up. So a very interesting turn of events. I think at this point, she has hit that point of no return. Like, I think she's out for blood. I think she wants to take anyone who had any level of complicity. I suspect she just wants to take them all down. And in Lori's mind, I do believe that she has probably been studying family law and all of those things. Is she, like qualified to represent herself? Absolutely not. But that clearly isn't stopping her. But I suspect at this point, she just probably feels like she has nothing to lose. Like she's never leaving Idaho. So if she's convicted in Arizona, I just think it's like, I don't think she really cares, because I think she knows she's never going to be extradited to Arizona, most likely. And so I think at this point, and I've talked many times about how petty Lori is. And I was surprised that she didn't do something to retaliate against some of these people before now. I suspect her attorneys probably pleaded with her to please not do anything like interviews and things like that until after after her trial. But I think at this point, she's just like, I've already gone down and I've been abandoned by all of these people who I helped, and they knew what was going on. And now I'm just going to take everyone down with me. So, Although I do feel for anyone who has something to hide. I do. But I think this might be the thing that gets some of the information I've been hoping to get out. Because if she's pulling up evidence, and obviously she knows this case better than anyone because she was living it. She remembers the text messages that she has sent. And unlike the rest of us, these past 5 years, like, we've all been dealing with all kinds of stuff that distract us. And like, just today I was talking to Janice Summers. I couldn't remember someone's name, who's involved in the case. And I was like, yeah, that's because I'm thinking of 80 other bajillion other things at this point. Not Lori. Lori has had 5 years, a lot of isolation. That's a lot of time to ruminate, chew the cud, like nurse those grudges. And she already has this femme fatale perspective. So, it's always like, she's this victim, she's the one who's hiding in the crevice of a rock, everyone's after her, persecution syndrome, all of those things. But you magnify that, and now she's been, according to my sources, she has been largely abandoned by everyone except her mom. And so, yeah, I just think at this point, she is just like, I have nothing to lose. Yeah. So anyway, it should prove to be interesting. I forget when the trial is scheduled to begin, but it's like late March. I think it's like March 25th, something like that. It's not the February 24th date. That was the original tentative date, but now it's about a month later. So, I mean, for, everything that she has to prepare for, she doesn't have a tremendous amount of time, but this trial is going to be lit. There is, I suspect, a lot of tea that is going to be spilled because there are so many details that are in the FOIA docs that have never come out. Like, so there's no context for them, and Janice and I were talking about this today. Like, there are things that, like, even with the other trials, like there were things that would come up and I'd be like, oh, whoa, that I read about that, in the FOIA docs. And then I would look up the FOIA docs sometimes when I was actually in the trial. And I'd be like, aha, that explains this, random kind of esoteric detail that I previously didn't have context for. And I suspect that will happen at a dizzying pace at Charles' trial, but then also at Brandon's trial, because someone I have always hoped we would get on the stand. Like, this person probably doesn't want to be on the stand, but I've always hoped that Rich Robertson would one day testify, because I think he is key to a lot of details that have been I don't know, glossed over. And that's even too generous. They haven't been glossed over. They've been misrepresented. And I've talked about this in other lives. Like, he'll kind of like pop his head up, like a groundhog right before, each of these trials, and do these interviews and drop absolutely mind-boggling truth bombs, and no one covers them. Like, it's like, okay, let's just pretend he didn't say that. Like, oh, well, we knew kids were missing, but no one was all that concerned at that point. Like, what? In what? And this isn't like an indictment against Rich. This is an indictment against the people he was working for. Like, in what universe, alternate universe, do you have people who know kids are missing, but they're not all that concerned, you know? And he was being interviewed by, oh gosh, I forget who it was, uh, Chris Cuomo. And you could see, like, Chris's eyes went like, what? Like, did I just hear that? And but you know, they didn't pursue it further. But anyway, so I do hope that we hear from Rich at some point, because he is the one person who, like, if I hear that he is being interviewed, and I'm not a flatterer, anyone who's followed this channel knows I am not a flatterer, but he is literally the one person, if I hear that he's being interviewed, is like, clear the schedule. I watch his interviews usually multiple times. But anyway, so yeah, so when we wrap up the Charles trial, then it will be Brandon's trial. You know, so and any evidence that is placed. So a lot of evidence that, you know, would have put. Oh, you know what? How is the sound? Because I forgot to put my microphone in front of me. I don't even know. Let me see here. My eyes. I'm not even sure which. Oh my gosh, it was using my microphone, which was pretty far away. Sorry about that. But anyway, so yeah, sorry. Now I forget what I was saying. But so a lot of evidence that would have or could have, like, made some of these witnesses look bad. Understandably, it just wasn't put in play in these trials. And some of the evidence, in my opinion, was pretty critical evidence, like the Amazon receipts, Chad's document identifying Tylee as a dangerously dark spirit. That wasn't admitted into evidence. And I think, you know, I've talked about this before, but I think it was to protect some of these victims, because a lot of these victims all were given this document, and some of the victims had access to the Amazon receipts, but they were never passed on to law enforcement. At least there is no evidence that any, the ratings document or the Amazon receipts were ever passed on to law enforcement. They were passed on to the media after the case went public, but not to law enforcement. And so I suspect that there is quite a bit of evidence that Lori will put into play. You know, I mean, you know, she'll be bounded by whatever the prosecution admits into evidence, but but yeah, so I think she will be incentivized to ask questions that and I have the utmost of respect for her public defenders in Idaho, but there were just too many details, you know, to try to keep track of. But not for her. She will know, although she will falter on, like, you know, legal proceedings and things like that. She will not falter when it comes to cross-examination. So, yeah. Enough about that. Okay, so I will answer questions about that. You know, to the best of my ability. I'm really not following all of it that closely till we get to the trial, and then I hope to be able to follow that trial really closely. Okay, so last time, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Do you think that Tammy knew more about what was happening before she died? I feel she had good intuition. So that's a really good question. Uh, I don't know. I don't know. Like, there were some surprises in Chad's trial, like the family thread about, Chad rating this one kid a dark spirit. And, um, so it did kind of call into question how much she was familiar with, this whole idea of rating people as light and dark. That doesn't mean she has complicity. I will say I do not believe that Tammy shared any complicity. I find that just too too difficult to believe. I do suspect that she knew about the affair, but as far as the rest, I just can't imagine that she would have known anything. I did cover in one live just some of the strange details, like finding out from one person who had been on the property, and actually two people, and this was several years after the kids' remains had been found, but they both reported that area where Tylee was buried, by the fire pit, still had an awful smell. Again, this is several years after the kids' remains were found. And so that really had me in the far left processing lane, because then it was just like, okay, well, at minimum, I've said for a long time, I absolutely think that the Daybell kids knew that the kids were buried on the property. The smell was just too bad, and they were getting paid off by their dad, and I think that's why they were willing to look the other way. But with Tammy, like, I dove pretty deep into it one week, like looking at the weather patterns during that time, like during the time between Tylee being buried, so September 8th, 9th, or September 9th, to the time of Tammy's murder. And, the fire pit wasn't that far from where she kept her ducks. And so I was looking at, like, okay, what days was it? What days were there high winds pointing in that direction? So I forget which direction that was from the fire pit to where she cared for her ducks. But there were a number of days. Now, that's not typically the direction of the winds when it's windy in Idaho, but there were days where there were high winds. And so, just having experienced the smell of dead body, and that decomposing corpse, I should say, and that was just like with opening up a box that had photo albums that had clearly been in Joe's apartment while he was dead and his body was decomposing. I mean, it was rancid. It was very, very strong. So I can't imagine, with all the remains that were fresh and freshly burned, and obviously Chad would have had to burn Tylee's remains in multiple passes. He wouldn't have been able to do that all at once. So that means you also had, remains being stored in that shed. But anyway, so most likely. But so, it is a very unusual detail that I can't really make sense of. But so it's unknown, like 95% of me wants to say there's no way she could have known anything. And I don't think that she knew that there were two kids buried on the on the property. And also I'm not victim blaming, but it is a bummer that Charles announced everything that he was going to do, because I think he was trying to coerce Lori to like bend to his will. So he was threatening her with these things, but he told her, I have Tammy Daybell's number and I'm going to call her, or I'm going to send her an email, I think he said. It's something like that, text, email. And that gave Chad every opportunity to intercept these text messages because Tammy was on summer break at that point. So, or email. So he was going to email her. And, but yeah, so, I mean, if he hadn't announced it, there is the chance that, a lot of bloodshed could have been spared potentially, because then Tammy would have known for sure. Okay, my husband is having an affair with this woman, and then she would have found out on the heels of that, like if Charles had still been murdered, that suspicious shooting death and stuff. So yeah, but I mean, at this point, the question is pretty much unanswerable. All I can do is say, okay, I have this piece of information, this piece of information, this piece of information. But, and I've used this analogy before, but it kind of feels like, okay, we have maybe 17 pieces of a 500-piece puzzle. Steph and Shaw. Do you think if they had not been caught, they would try to kill Brandon again? I do. I mean, I think at that point, they, it's kind of hard to say, because I think at some point, Alex was just going to be like, listen, I'm not going back there. I'm not taking another pass at this. Like, I lucked out, a couple times now. But, yeah, that I also suspect that, I mean, this part I don't suspect. This part is a pretty raging statement of the obvious, that murder would have been largely for Melanie's benefit. I don't think Lori would have benefited that much. I do suspect that Alex was going to get a cut of it, and Lori was probably going to get a cut for, like, authorizing the use of creepy Uncle Al to do the dirty deed. But for the most part, the main recipient of, all of the benefits of that murder would have been Melanie. And just a little side note, it is a misnomer that Brandon had $1 million policy. He didn't. It was still sizable, but I think it was like maybe around 300,000. So, they made more from, him buying her out of half of their business and the sale of their home. But if he had been dead, she would have gotten the full proceeds of the sale of the home. And I also thought it was interesting that Al went back there pretty early. Like, he got there a full day before the murder. Or the attempted murder. And I thought that was kind of unusual, because it was like, well, like the family didn't know he was in town. So, I'm not sure, it just didn't like make sense. Whoa. Why wait an extra day? But then it came out that they closed on their home I think it was October 1st. And I'm like 99% sure. Well, actually, let me just look it up. On the timeline. Yeah. So they closed on their home October 1st. So I wonder if someone told Melanie, listen, you don't want to murder him before you close, because then, this stuff could get like caught up in probate court. I mean, who knows? But it does seem like I've wondered if the original plan was to murder Brandon before they closed on the home. And then maybe Melanie was thinking, okay, well, then that will just be all of my money. Who knows? But anyway, so yeah, now I don't think anyone else was at risk. And I don't say that just because no one else was murdered. I say that because, people who are like, oh, it's a good thing that, Colby was already out of the house. He could have been next. I absolutely do not believe that, because he was the favored one. I think that may have changed with the interview, but like Lori practically worshipped the ground that Colby walked on. And so I don't think, and he was rated a light spirit, but not everyone who was rated a dark spirit was at risk, because they couldn't just go around, like, go over to Louisiana, go to Kansas, like they couldn't just like go on a world, you know, a countrywide murder spree. And Lori knew that Alex wasn't that reliable. So I think the only people who were in imminent danger were those who stood in the way of, Lori and Chad being together in the way that they felt that they needed to be together. Like, Chad would be Lori's only focus and vice versa. And anyone who they stood to profit from. I also think that was part of the reason that Melanie Pulaski actually said in one of her interviews, this was in the FOIA docs, that she would die before testifying against Lori or Chad. So she did not die, and she did testify, but her testimony was largely useless. It was decorative at best. But yeah, so I think that they wanted to, but at that point, after Alex missed, Lori and Chad, they wanted to get on with the wedding. They wanted to get married. And I do suspect that there was quite a bit of friction between them and Melanie. And I suspect, like, for a while, I could not understand. They knew that it was like early November. They were on their honeymoon, and I think it was like November 3rd, maybe. Now these details aren't as fresh in my mind, but November 4th, they seized the Jeep. Now, it's really, when you look at this case from a timeline perspective, that it really takes form. Like, okay, so Lori and Chad were in Hawaii getting married. They hadn't even been married yet. They were in Hawaii, but I think they were married, I think maybe the next day. Yeah, the 5th. And so Rexburg police come and impound the Jeep. So the Jeep is gone, but they return to Rexburg. Like, and they don't just return to Rexburg. They stay in their homes. Like, what kind of criminal is like, okay, yeah, the handwriting is on the wall. The police came. took our Jeep. We're not even going to question why someone came and impounded our Jeep, but then they continued to live at that address, which is absolutely bizarre to me. Like, why didn't they go on the run, or why didn't Lori and Chad just stay in Hawaii? That was one of their plans. But I suspect that's where Melanie comes into play, because Melanie had just moved to Rexburg right before, like the week that if memory, yeah, it was like, I think she rolled into town a couple days before the Jeep was impounded. So she arrives in Rexburg. She's unpacking. Immediately, Lori and Chad go off to Hawaii to get married. So Melanie's there by herself, and then they come back. And I have always suspected that the reason they came back and stayed had to do with Melanie, because I imagine that there was friction, that here she moves to Idaho, and if they had just stayed in Hawaii or taken off, for somewhere else, that would have left her alone. And that is obviously eventually what happened. But anyway, until she was married. But yeah, so I've always suspected that there was a lot of chaos and probably some infighting during that time that Lori and Chad were in Rexburg, because they had to know. It was just a matter of time. They were clearly being investigated. So, yeah, strange. Okay, Darlene Wesley asked, do you think the $6,000 that Alex left to Zulema was payoff money for killing her? No. No. I strongly suspect that was payment for Zulema's role in Alex's death. Because, and I've talked about this before, so if you've heard this, apologies, but I try not to operate under the assumption that someone who asks a question has seen one of these other marathon lives. But Zulema had said that she hadn't seen Lori since she left for Idaho. Then I learned in the FOIA docs that not only was that a lie, because she had visited Lori and Chad in Rexburg, and this was in between the two kids' murders. Yeah, if memory serves me. Yeah. So Tylee had already been murdered. She was gone, but JJ hadn't been murdered yet. And so there was that trip. Obviously, that was that was September. So that was after Lori had left Arizona. But then I found a text exchange between Zulema and Lori, because Zulema was prolific with these text messages that she would send to Lori, and they talked about meeting up. So Lori and Chad were coming back from Hawaii, and they had a layover in Phoenix. So I think they flew in to the Phoenix airport, but then were leaving from the Mesa airport. But they had a layover of like 6 or 8 hours, something like that. And in that time, who is the one person we know they met up with? Zulema. And keep in mind, Zulema was kind of the annoying tag-along for them. Like, they kept ghosting her, and she would send them both a lot of text messages. She had a lot of questions and really needed a lot of affirmation. I think that's what Zulema was in this for. Like, she just found this freaky family, and she needed all of these affirmations, and I think she was just also lonely. But not just lonely, because she was the one who also kind of got the ball rolling with the murders of Lori's family members. So, there were other much deeper issues. But so she meets up with Chad and Lori. So she's like the most annoying one in the group, and they meet up with her coming back from their honeymoon. And in true Lori fashion, she was like, oh yeah, come on, over to the hotel, we'll go out to dinner. And then dinner was reduced to, just come to the hotel room, Chad will give you a blessing. So they didn't even take her to dinner. And I think she drove them to the airport. But I suspect, so, well, what's interesting to me when people lie is why? Why are they lying? Why did Zulema tell law enforcement that she hadn't seen Lori since she left for Arizona if she had nothing to hide? So the fact that she lied and left out, well, she didn't just leave out the fact that she met with him, she also lied and said she hadn't seen him. So why lie? So that, in my estimation, casts a very suspicious light on what happened in that meeting, and why would they even want to meet up with her. Like, Melanie Pulaski, Melanie wasn't even in Arizona at that point. But like someone they really cared about, like I could, maybe kind of imagine, but still, like, that's not a very long layover when you're talking about, having to, like to travel from one airport to another, go through security again. So I strongly suspect that they didn't want a paper trail, and she met up with them, and they gave her cash. And I think that's where the bag of cash came from. And I suspect that it also explains the weird detail that Zulema shared about Lori giving her, like, some expensive haircutting scissors. So I suspect at that point, my daughter does vintage hair, and every stylist has like a pair of shears that they really invest in, because it makes a big difference in haircuts and stuff. And so I suspect that Lori, was like, well, I'm not going to need them. And that was just part of the payment. But at that point, Zulema didn't know how much of an investigation they would do. And they did get a search warrant for the home. So I suspect she just cut him off at the pass, in the event that they came across this bag of money, like, just to let you know, Alex gave that to me, and just said, in case anything happens to me. But that doesn't make sense. She most likely had access to his finances. We don't know, but that's so weird. And I doubt that there was a whole lot of trust between Alex and Zulema. I also suspect that's why Zulema shared that weird story about they were on their honeymoon and Alex put down a tarp and all this up, offered to give her a massage, and they were like, oh, you might have been his next victim. I was like, that's ridiculous. Like, all of these people who are complicit, they keep trying to rewrite the narrative to make it look like they were probably next. Melanie Gidd did the same thing by telling investigators that she lived around the corner. She was like, now remember, I'm living around the corner from murderers. And I'm like, that's amazing, because she just said she knew that both Alex and Zulema were murderers. So, because they all lived in Gilbert, and apparently pretty close to one another. Um, oh, Laura asked, where did you get those glasses? Okay, so I got this black and white pair, and I love them so much. They are just so fun. And I've had glasses that I have really loved before, but I used to travel a lot, and I was notorious for leaving them in the pocket of like the airline, or, like on the chair, and whatever, where I'm like sitting in the airport and stuff. So I lose my reading glasses a lot. So this time when I got the black and white pair, I was like, I love these so much. So I got a pair in red because they're just so fabulous. But anyway, I got them from, and they kind of have this Take On Me vibe. Is that the song? Like the song from the 80s where they did like it would go back and forth from real life to sketch. And when I first saw the black and white pair, I thought it was like a drawing. Like I was like, why do they randomly have this like drawing of glasses? And then I clicked through. But anyway, Zelu, it's I think Zellool. So the LOOL kind of looks like a pair of glasses. I love them. They're very affordable. I think I paid like, I don't know, when I had the prescription put in them, I think they were like maybe around $40. But that's the thing. Like I had a client who sold frames online. And it is such a competitive industry. And as more and more retailers get into the business, like it just pushes the prices down. So I also got a lime green pair. Because I was like, because like sometimes I'll lose my glasses, and then I'll, just a second, someone's trying to get in. My daughter must have ordered Grubhub. Oh, I think it's Amazon. Sorry. Okay. So, yeah. So, but what will happen is like I'll lose a pair of frames, and then I go to order a new pair, and it's been discontinued. So this time I think I bought one of every color except for purple, because I'm not a big purple person. But okay. And then, Sonia asked, was it April that dropped the bombshell about Lori threatening her? I don't remember. No. I don't remember April saying that. It was the other chick, Audrey Baratiero. She's the one who I did a whole live about her. So if you just search my YouTube channel for Audrey, it should come up. But yeah, her claims, they just don't cut mustard, in my opinion. They don't make sense. They're, it's just like, oh, okay, so she threatened to, cut you up, and then said like something about the cleanup, like there was going to be, so much cleanup. I'm like, people don't include like the cleanup in a threat, they're not like, and then I got to pull out the bleach and blah, 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 like it just made no sense. But then also is like, okay, if someone threatened to murder you and like cut you into cutlets, why would you spend the night? You know what I mean? Like I would have been out of there. I would have left my stuff behind, like, so the whole thing, it made no sense. And then she appeared before, oh gosh, what? Man, some of these details are, I don't want to misspeak. But yeah, I think, yeah, she's the one who appeared before the grand jury in Idaho, not once, but twice. And never once did she mention anything about Lori threatening her. And Jim Archibald was rightly all over that. And I think it's the only time we saw him really get riled up, in the trial. But, I do find, I mean, I find the true crime community is largely just beautiful. Like, I really, really love this community. I can see even in my YouTube data that is largely women. I think like 96% of my channel is women. So, that tracks. For the occasional Y chromosome who shows up, welcome. But yeah, so, but one criticism I would have of the true crime community, and I did see some improvement even throughout this case, but I do see a level of gullibility and people going so far as like treating claims as facts. It's just like, oh, fact. Lori threatened to murder Audrey. Not fact. Claim. We do not have her on audio or video. We don't have any evidence. She didn't put anything in writing. So without any kind of evidence, like a lot of the things that I've shared, they're claims. I've shared experiences that my family had with Lori. Now, I know that I have an overactive conscience and I am very, very exacting, but that doesn't mean that like memories can't be off and things like that. So, anything that you don't have in writing or, some kind of evidence is not a fact. It's a claim, and so, I know one of the victims had said, like something to the effect of like referencing Audrey's tears as like, it was like her tears and her emotional state was a form of self-authentication. It's like, I just don't think anyone could get that emotional, if it weren't true. And it's like, okay, that is a slippery slope because one, I didn't see any tears. I heard dramatics, but I didn't see any tears, and I thought it was interesting, like when Joe was interviewed. This is going to be a little gross, but when Joe was interviewed by the woman who was assessing if he had the profile of a sexual predator, one of the things that she noted was that when he was talking about, just like what he was going through with Lori, that he cried and it appeared genuine. And she included like something about it had the snot factor. I was like, oh, that's so gross. But it was kind of a peek behind the curtain that's one of the things. And, even just having watched as much true crime as I have, that's something that investigators will reference. Like, okay, and it's like typically the husband, like he made a lot of noise, but there weren't any tears, and so, but that also doesn't mean even if someone cries that's authenticating. It's not. But if there aren't tears and someone's talking and they have all the theatrics, like, their voice, gets higher and, they kind of sound like their voice is cracking a little bit. If there are no tears, that it can very well be theatrics. So I think when you combine all the factors, and I think the most condemning factor was that she didn't mention it to the grand jury. And I think at that point, she just didn't realize, she didn't think through her strategy. And I think she just didn't probably realize just how big this case would get. But anyway, so yeah, that was Miss Audrey. Okay, those were all of the questions from last time, and let's see. Someone asked if I've followed other cases these past years. Not really. Like a little bit of like the Idaho 5 or whatever they called that. A little, you know, like very, very little of the Murdoch case. But you know, one, I've been very busy with, you know, like health issues and then school, and now like just catching up on life. So yeah, I really haven't. Oh, this Idaho mom reports said East Idaho news peeps were asking about justice for your brother again today. So that's great. Yeah. And that's another thing that honestly, that's another reason I'm glad we're going to have this really unpredictable element in Charles and Brandon's cases, because, or not cases, but their trials, because again, there's just more opportunity for more information to be made public. And once it's public, it's a lot harder for them to make a case for redacting it in the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA documents. So, and sometimes, you know, like that one video I shared of Charles on the body cam video, like a single word can completely change the entire context of a statement. So Charles was talking to investigators, police. This was in January, the end of January 2019, and he was talking about Lori threatening him, and he said, and she said, "I'm going to kill you too." And it was just one of those things. Like, I had listened to that body cam footage before, but I was looking for something else. And it was just one of those kind of surreal moments where, you know, it's like, imagine my head, like you hear like the record scratching, you know, it's just like, did he just say two? Like, two? That changes everything. Like, you don't say that your estranged wife said she's going to kill you too unless she killed someone else. Yeah, and he knew about it because, you know, like he glazed over that, you know, just like he didn't double down on that on that point, and the police officer didn't catch it, or was like, I don't know what to do with any of this. But but yeah, you have this many people you know, testifying, and then, you know, more releases of these FOIA docs. Stuff is going to come out, you know. And anyway, so like there was even a little detail from the second round of FOIA docs that came out of Chandler, where it mentioned that, like, starting, I think it was the night that Lori and Chad met, or maybe the next day, he started to search for obituaries, and they just like glossed over it. They expanded the timeline. It was like from, you know, October 26th or 27th, whatever day he first searched for these obituaries, to like some date in 2020, you know, and so it's like, oh, nothing to see here, it could have been any of these days. He was searching for like obituaries for various family members. And I'm like, yeah, okay. He was searching for Joe's obituary, maybe Stacy, but mostly Joe. And he would have seen there was no obituary. Uh, okay. Oh, Chris Sanders asked, will Lori be able to interview Chad through this trial if she calls him as a witness? Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, there could be so many interesting dynamics. And I don't say this gleefully. I imagine there are a lot of people who have lost sleep over this turn of events, or one of them being Chad. I'm sure they will probably be happy to get to talk to each other. But yeah, it's just going to be wild. This is going to be one of the wildest trials of all time. Okay. Oh, hey, Dr. Von de Kay, one of my favorites. I've been wondering about Alex's charges in relation to tasering Joe and how the police was able to overlook the fact or simply not check that Alex had been in prison and probably shouldn't own a gun. So this is a loaded question. No pun intended. There are details that are pretty sketch. So Detective Moffat claimed that Alex's possessor rights had been restored. That's what he told Colby Ryan. But an analyst with the FBI, I forget her name, it was Elizabeth something. I really like her. You could tell she is an analyst. She was so thorough when she would do research. One of the tasks that she was given was to see if Alex's possessor rights had been restored. So she reached out to Travis County. Unlike Detective Moffat, she showed her work. She reached out to Travis County and talked to someone there to see if Alex's possessor rights had been restored, after serving time. And the person she talked to said that if they had been restored, his record would be expunged. It was something like the only way they would be restored would have been if his record had been expunged. But the fact that they saw his criminal record and the fact that he had gone to jail indicated, obviously, his record hadn't been expunged. But then she added that a lot of times it explicitly says that the person's possessor rights had been restored, and there wasn't any note about his possessor rights being restored. So her logical conclusion was that his possessor rights had not been restored. So, and even though, some people, and again, it's fine. If we don't agree on something, what is a little tough, especially after dealing with, almost 5 years of this, is sometimes just the leaps of logic people make, oh, well, it's Texas, everyone's packing heat in Texas. And, but I don't like to share a whole lot of, personal details about my life, but there was a point in my life when I was living in Florida. I had a stalker in real life. And at one point, this person, I didn't even know this person. I had been at an event that this person was at one time. But this person started stalking me and was obviously very unstable. But and I knew that this person was stalking. But there wasn't much I could do about it because I didn't have like evidence. But then this person called my workplace, found out where I worked, and left a message for my manager. And I never heard the message, but when I got to work that day, and then this person had called in the middle of the night, left a message, and actually called back again. So called it like 3 a.m. and then another time, sometime after 3, but long before people are in the office. And there was a threatening aspect to it. So I get to work. I was an intensely private person. So no one at work knew that I had a stalker. And I get to work and they were like, we need to keep you in the inner perimeter of the building. This person, called and left, verifiable threats, and, yada, yada. So my world was kind of turned upside down. So I had to go and get an injunction, which is basically a restraining order with some extra teeth. And in Florida, Florida is very generous, like Texas, in, being able to own firearms. After this whole incident, I got a gun, went to, a class and stuff. But they had told me, well, no, that's not true. I got a gun a little while later. But they had told me that, with the first incident, they typically don't take away the person's gun rights. And I was like, that's fine. I really didn't think like the person was actually going to, murder me. But this person was obviously very, very unstable. So, who knows? But but I wasn't going for that. I just wanted him to stay away from me and, my kids, because he would drive by the house, and it was such a nuisance. But but they told me, because it's the first incident, they're probably not going to take away his gun rights. If they do, it will be a year maximum. And so I was like, oh, fine. I just wanted him to stay away. Well, his appearance at court wasn't impressive. He had a really big beer belly, and he wore a t-shirt to court, and a t-shirt didn't totally cover up his beer belly. He was just a hot mess. And then when the judge asked him something about like another incident, because he had a criminal record, he tried to say that sometimes his brother used his driver's license, but he had actually gone to jail. So the judge was like, I've heard enough. Took away his gun rights for life. Like, the guy worked as a security guard, and he wasn't going to be able to work as a security guard. And but so all that to say, like, he didn't go to jail. Like, he wasn't arrested. This was, just an injunction order. But they took away his possessor rights. And so where am I going with this? The fact that he was charged and went to jail, not prison, but he went to jail for aggravated assault. To just assume that, oh, well, Detective Moffat's rationale was, well, he did the time, and after you do the time in Texas, they restore your rights. So I do suspect that this issue will come up in the trial. But what I didn't see from Detective Moffat was any showing of his work. There was just like this kind of off the cuff, explanation to Cole that Alex was legally allowed to to have a gun. So, yeah, it's, now I forget the rest of the question. Let's see. Yeah, so the fact that they didn't appear to, like, even Gilbert police, well, wait, was it Gilbert? Oh, yeah, no. So Gilbert police, when Charles called and they came out, this was a minor detail, but toward the end of the body cam video, they asked Charles for his driver's license. And then one of them went back to the car. And he's like, he even said something like, I just need to run this, or, something like that. So it's quite apparent, if I'm reading this correctly, that he ran a background check on Charles. But you didn't see Chandler police do that to Alex after he shot someone. In fact, they didn't even check him for weapons. Like, he came out, he had his hands up, but then he sat down and they just started talking to him. They never checked him for weapons. It wasn't until I think they asked, like, police officer, detective, had already, like, questioned him quite a bit, and he got up, I think, to get in the car, and Alex puts his hands up and says something like, kind of like, I know you'll probably want to, search me. And the guy said something, if memory serves me, it was something like, yeah, we should do that. And, that's bizarre. Like, he just killed a person and they took his word for it that he didn't have the gun on him, that he left it in the bedroom. So here you have a man who called the police because he was being victimized, and they appear to run a background check on him. Then you have a man who shot another man. None of their stories lined up. There were so many issues, and they didn't. If anyone ran a background check on him, it wasn't on camera, and there was no reference to it when he was interviewed by Detective Moffat. So, yeah, it is. And it is. You see this this imbalance again and again. Like, you see it with Lori and Joe. Like, Alex tased Joe, and I think it was like within 2 weeks, Lori filed for Joe's parental rights to be terminated. Like, that's how they just become so brazen. It's like, oh, well, I don't want people asking too many questions, like, how did your brother know where Joe would be? And at what time, so there's no evidence any questions like that were asked. But then Joe wasn't able to see Tylee, and it's just like there was just this, like, bizarre imbalance again and again throughout these cases that led up to this much bigger case. So, yeah, I hope to learn more. I hope that they will put that FBI analyst, Elizabeth, I think, like, it was Keller or something like that. I closed out of my timeline. I'm not sure why I did that. But yeah, I hope we hear more from her, because she was pretty amazing. Okay. Let's see if there are any more other questions. Iris Ramos said, Lori can dispose, I think she meant depose. She can't dispose of Chad. Lori can depose Chad if he is called as a witness, but prosecution will be there. Yeah, that's always the case, when there's a deposition. Lori doesn't get to do it alone. Yeah. Any deposition is also a written transcript of any conversation between any of the parties. I don't know if deposit was a typo. But yeah, there's always a written transcript of a deposition. Yep. Okay, so another question just came in. But wouldn't all of them benefit from Brandon Boudreaux's death because they had plans for their tent cities and whatever craziness? Yeah, like that's the going story, but I think that assumption really overestimates Melanie's generosity. I do not think that Melanie was going to be down with financing this whole tent city thing. I don't think she ever planned to live in a tent city. I mean, that is, yeah. I imagine Melanie capable of glamping at best. Let's see. Someone said I missed a question. Let me see. Okay, well, let me finish this one. So yeah, I think a little bit, but I think it was most likely just going to be more like cuts. Like I think Alex was going to get a cut. Lori was probably going to get a finder's fee, sort of, but for the most part, Melanie was going to keep all of that money. Okay. Anna Cahill asked, also, you think she is doing this just to be able to speak to Chad? No. Can she legally speak to him now? I don't think so. I don't know if we have a lawyer, but that wouldn't really make sense. I don't think, because I don't think defense attorneys just like randomly get to talk to victims. So yeah, unless you're talking about like a deposition. But like Ira said, like in a deposition, you're not going to have one-on-one time. But in this case, they're not considered co-defendants. So I don't know. I mean, I outside of the limitations of both of them being incarcerated, I don't know that there would be a limitation specific to like what we saw in Idaho, where they couldn't talk to each other except for like very minimally. I think they talked to each other maybe once or twice. But yeah, and they're not co-defendants. Okay, and she continued, I was wondering if she could speak to Chad via telephone to depose him in order to prepare for her trial, or if they are prohibited from speaking. So you can't depose someone over the phone. Like a deposition is a very formal process. So even if there's a telephonic component, like it's recorded and stuff. So yeah, I don't really know. That's outside my area of expertise, to know exactly how that goes down. I just don't know, but it will be wild watching her question Chad, for sure, like at minimum. And it will also be interesting to see if there's like a differential between their like apparent affection levels, because the longer Chad sits in prison, I mean, we don't really know where his head is. Is he like, no, still worth it? Or if he's like, I rue the day I ever answered uh, her message over eval. And I do suspect that they had extensive contact before they met in person, but I think they met in person for the first time October 26th, but I suspect she had reached out to him before that. But they would have deleted those records. And aside from, like, someone from the FBI had infiltrated the eval forum and captured a bunch of threads for like that particular day, but there's no evidence that they did any kind of like extensive I don't know, investigation into eval, or like how they actually may have first gotten in contact with each other. Because some of these details, they're more interesting to people who are following the case than like the people who are actually litigating, or like, gathering the evidence, and then those who are litigating the case. Like, they really have to kind of stay laser focused on the details that will put them away. Okay. Let's see. So Kyrie, that's a really pretty name. Said, although I may have mispronounced it, it might be Curie, I don't know, but it's very cute. I'm wondering if Lori wanting to represent herself has to do with putting Chad on the stand. Has he been ghosting her? Well, I don't think that they can have any kind of contact. Again, kind of going back to my previous point about, I think, just the logistics of them both being incarcerated. I don't know if they can have contact, but I really don't think that it's just about being able to talk to Chad. Like, I think that that's a component, but I think it's, and then I think that there's a very strong retaliatory motive here, but also I think just knowing what I know of Lori and what I've seen of her throughout the course of this case, after 5 years of feeling out of control, so she's had more than 5 years of being on the run and, and then incarceration, like, I mean, she can't even eat when she wants to eat. Like, her entire world is being determined by other people. And I think after 5 years of that, I think at this point she wants control. Yeah, and this is the only way she can get that. Like, with being represented by public defenders, she has no assurance of how much they were going to invest into like really learning the details of the case. And then, but from the little I've heard and what I've seen, I imagine she's an extremely difficult client. You saw her furious. I mean, just fuming like an angry toddler when Jim Archibald was giving his closing statements. I mean, he was throwing spaghetti at the wall. He was just, doing whatever he could to defend his client. But she was clearly very angry that he threw Chad under the bus, because he was basically like, who was going to follow Chad? Like, I mean, it was like the dork defense, and I think that was infuriating to Lori. So, for 5 years, she has had everyone else making decisions for her. And then all of these people who she probably feel like they owe her something, people who were complicit in one way or the other, either through acts of omission and or commission, and she sees them all just abandoning her, and it's almost like like they got a little overly confident, like they just kind of saw her as like almost like what was that character from Rudolph, like the Bumble, like the he became a like a humble Bumble, and the abominable snowman. Yeah, and it's almost like, oh, well, she's toothless now, and she's stayed quiet through 2 trials and stuff. So I think people kind of got like a little confident, like I can say whatever I want because I own the narrative, and I just think like Lori hit that point of no returns where she was like, no, I want to, for once, I want to own the narrative. And I could be wrong. I have no experience in psychology, haven't studied it aside from Psych 101 in college, but I suspect that is a much stronger motivation for her. Okay. NF Mom said, do you think Lori will blame Tylee for Charles like she tried to when she spoke with Colby? I I don't know. I think Lori came to despise Tylee so much, and I think anything is possible. But I suspect at this point, like, when she made those comments, she wasn't in front of a jury. I mean, now she did make some really bizarre statements in front of a jury when she allocuted, but not like she didn't accuse Tylee of anything. She kept it very kind of nominal. She accused Joe, and then, some came behind her, authenticating her claims. But as if she assumed she had any kind of credibility after abandoning Tylee. But yeah, so I don't um yeah, I don't think, I think it's improbable that she'll try to accuse Tylee of anything, just because that she knows that would not reflect favorably on her to a jury. So I think she's probably going to stay very demure, very cutesy, very mindful, that there's a jury listening to her. Uh, Okay, Christine said, Hallelujah by Lori makes me think if they made a deal with Alex, him repenting and promise to getting rid of the dark ones for the blessing and a promise of being united with fam in heaven. Uh, okay. I don't really know what the question is. But I do think there clearly was some kind of manipulation that Lori engaged in, that is indicated in that song, because she talked about how it started with Julie Rowe and that turned on the light, like it was just so corny. But let me see. Um, okay. Yeah. I actually have the lyrics on my, oh, no, I'm gonna wear red as it goes with my Christmas nails. Okay, so I heard there was a new podcast Alex played and it pleased the Lord. He had no idea how it would change him. It started out with Julie Rowe and it turned on the light, and he was changed forever in an instant. he started small to build the light. So that's kind of a hat tip to kind of what she said to Zulema about Alex being like a kindergartner in response to spiritual matters. But he started small to build the light. Darkness went away at night. The Lord began to fill him. Hallelujah. He read a book on paradise. He cried out all his tears at night and fell upon his knees now. Hallelujah. He knows there is a God above. He surely taught him how to love, and that confirms his end times every day now. The darkness now has left his heart, and he knows how to play his part. And Jesus smiles down on him forever. So I just think that Lori basically came along and was like, hey, I know you've been excommunicated, not once, but twice. The family had largely abandoned him because that was a point of shame to have a son who was excommunicated. And, they were obviously disapproving of his, his sex tourism trips to South America and things like that. And Lori came along and said, you know what? It's fine. All of it is just fine because you're going to do this, these things for God. So she sang this song on November 5th, 2017. Colby said in one of his interviews with Chandler Police, I think his only interview with Chandler Police, he said that his mom and Al had started hanging out again in January 2018, or around January 2018. And that is, and then Joe was clearly murdered in March because he was found in early April 3rd on her dad's birthday. But he had been dead, probably closer to 3 weeks. So you put all these things together here. Oh, and Janice had said in the Netflix interview she did, or the interview she did for the Netflix documentary, that they started listening to these different podcasts shortly after they got back from Hawaii. And so that was, I believe, early 2017. Because I'm not exactly sure about that. I'll have to double check that. But yeah, so it just seems like they come back from Hawaii. Lori is listening to these podcasts. Then she loops Alex in, but she has an agenda. I think she had already started grooming Alex to murder Joe. And, I don't know how he was beholden to her. Like I said, in another live, someone who had been friends with her for years when they were kids said that Lori did tell her that Alex had sexually abused her in some way. So I don't know if she used that or if there were other things that she held over him. But clearly she got inside Alex's head and really turned him into a killing machine to the point where he was able to not only, kill a teenager, but a little boy with special needs. Like, so, yeah, there's, I think that song represents a lot of backstory about like just what it what it took to get Alex to the point where he was willing to kill. And you know, just even the ominous references to, you know, like, he knew what he had to do. Like, this was, you know, somehow like his calling. And you know, she and eventually Chad as well, just, you know, we're grooming him for that. Wild hair, I can see it on the edge, on the corner of my eye. But yeah, so, and even the point about he cried out all his tears at night, like, there was another reference to him crying after Chad's corny priesthood blessing, which I was somewhat skeptical of that claim until I learned that they found that priesthood blessing in his truck. Uh, so at that point, you know, that was December, and that was like after, you know, the Charles was murdered, the kids were murdered, Tammy was murdered, and he's still driving around with this priesthood blessing. I think that is indicative of just how much that blessing meant to him. But I think there was like this internal war going on in his heart, because you know, he wanted that acceptance, but he still wanted to live the life that he wanted to live. And one person who had been friends with Alex did reach out to me and share a rumor. And this person was really careful. This person gave me permission to share it, but I didn't share it for a long time, just because there were so many like really crazy things being shared that, you know, we would end up finding out like there was no basis of truth. And I didn't want to just kind of feed that fire, you know. But this person had said that there was a rumor among the people who had been on the mission with Alex. But this rumor was like I got the impression that this was a more recent thing, that Alex was into a huge trigger warning, because it's very, very disturbing. But he said that Alex was into little boys dressed like girls. And that the rumor was that when he went down to South America, that was his that was his thing. And so, you know, I mean, again, the person said we had no way of verifying this. And it is just a rumor. So I appreciated that, because at this point, like when he shared this detail with me, I think it was like 2020, and people were not being careful. But it was the fact that he was so careful for me, and I knew that this person had been on the mission with Alex, but it lent more credibility to at least the claim that this was a rumor that their like friend group had talked about. But so yeah, so for Lori and Chad to basically give him a clean slate, like, it's okay, whatever you're doing, like, we're probably not thrilled about it, but you are just a kindergartner in the kingdom, and but you know what? You have this special calling to defend your sister. And I also do think that Chad's words carried more influence than Lori's. There are just little details that make me think that, but so I think Chad was able to double down on what Lori had already started with Alex by the time he met Alex. Okay, Jenny Meow Meow asked, does she have to prove that Chad knew something to subpoena him? Or can she just lie slash exaggerate? Hmm. Mm, no, I don't know. I don't know what the burden of proof is with subpoena, because there must be something, because subpoena, well, obviously there's something. You can't just subpoena anyone you want. But I know that subpoenas can be quashed. So, so yeah, I just don't know what that burden of proof is, or that threshold. But clearly, I mean, she would not have a difficult time. Like, yeah, she would not have a difficult time getting a subpoena, because she was in contact with Chad that entire day and for 2 days before, like had protracted conversations. Even the night of July 9th, when Melanie Gibb came over and Lori said her whole family was there with all the kids and stuff. She, even with all of these people at her house, she was on the phone with Chad. I think it was hours. It was at least more than an hour. But yeah, so uh B Bunny Bailey. Where do you guys come up with these names? Annie, will you write a memoir someday on your life slash experiences? You speak so eloquently and precisely. Thank you. I imagine a book written by you would be an excellent read. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know. I don't know. There is, you know, interestingly, I think it was like maybe 2007 or something. Uh, I bought the domain Word of the State because I had thought if I ever write a book about my experience in foster care, I would call it Ward of the State. And I still own that domain. So I had always thought about like writing that book, but like really more for the sake of people, like kids who are in foster care or people who have survived the foster care system. I mean, every once in a while you hear a story about someone having a good experience, but typically, even if you have, like, one of my brothers, well, actually all of my brothers were in more stable foster homes than what like our biological family provided. My sister and I were in extremely abusive homes. But even like a good foster care experience is still going to be obviously very traumatizing, because there's this ripping apart of, you know, children from their families. Even if it's for their protection and it's totally justified, it's still, you know, very, very difficult. But so, you know, I'd always thought about that. But then with the case, I did, to be transparent, I did consider writing a book, but after seeing how some of these, who I believe to be family members and people who have a lot to hide, seeing their aggressive use of sock puppets, I've just thought like it would be spitting into the wind. There was even one documentary I was very seriously considering doing, because it would be written from the perspective, I mean, it would be done from the perspective of the kids, and this person, brilliant producer. It was so interesting. I really miss our email exchanges, and this person really wanted to know the truth, so wasn't one of those, you know, people who understandably are like, cringe, like I want to know these details, but it's also really hard to listen to some of these details. She was like, let's cover it all. But as I thought about it more, because I had said, like, I'm in school, I have so much going on, I can't even think about a documentary. But then as I thought about it, I was like, you know what, for your sake, I'm going to say no, because anything I do is going to become a target of these people who have already proved that they will aggressively engage in sock puppet warfare, to try to, I mean, basically there are several main agendas. One is to intimidate anyone else who would dare to even, like, not even just agree with me, but say, well, I don't know, like, I mean, I would see this on Reddit or in Facebook groups, like, well, I mean, she makes a valid point about whatever. And then all these, people who, I believe after a while, like some with some of them, I was like, oh, this writing style or this hysteria style is, the pretty easy to pin. But all these people would be like, how dare you say that about, this person who, like, practically walks on water, that person is a victim. If it weren't for this person, the kids would have never been found, and all this stuff. So I just said, like, if I do this, it will look like you were unsuccessful as a documentarian, because there will just, there will be a targeted attack. So, the same with a book, so what I am gravitating toward, time permitting. So but first things first, I am most interested. Well, now I'm really interested in the trials, because they are going to be extremely much more interesting than the Idaho trial, where, everything was like so guarded and protected. This, I think, will be a very interesting trial. But I still am more interested in the FOIA docs that are released. And I've already kind of built the backbone of an AI app, so that when all of this information comes in, I can train the AI app on all of this information and do something with that. But it will be, probably a pretty unusual approach to covering a case. If I do this, it will most likely be a documentary that I self-produce and publish on A Murderous Heart, because then I have an army of people who, like, they are like our mods, like, they don't just like quash people who disagree. But, when people come in, how dare you, hysteria, way too many exclamation marks, who do you think you are, that kind of stuff. I'm like, that sounds like someone who has a horse in the race. And, and so at least there is some moderation. But I mean, part of the reason I stopped doing interviews is that these people would be all through the comments, like on YouTube or whatever, and even after giving my victim impact statement, so anyway, so that's, I don't know that I'll be able to pull all of this together, but that is that is my hope, that if I were to do anything, that's most likely what it will be. And if I write a book, it will be, I'll probably touch on this case, because, I learned a lot about Joe through this case, because I've talked about this before. Like, he and I, we were largely strangers. It wasn't until, this whole case happened that, like, I even tried to sit down and think about, like, how many memories did I have with Joe as a child? And there were very, very few. Like, I think I ended up being able to count them on one hand, maybe one hand and a couple of fingers. And, and as much as this is going to sound hyperbolic, none of them were positive. Like, and some of them started positive, but then something would happen, where he was just so explosive, and I was so much younger than he was, that I just like stayed pretty far away from him. I mostly, if I talked to anyone, in fact, I was so quiet in our visits. My siblings, they were all older. I was the youngest of five. They would talk about me like I was dead. Like I remember as a kid thinking that, like, they're talking about me like I'm dead. But they would just say things like, "Oh, Annie doesn't talk." Like they would just, like, if someone, like started talking to me, like they would say, she doesn't talk. And I would kind of laugh to myself, because I'd be like, if only my teachers could hear this. But I was just so shut down, and everything. I mean, it was just, whether it was a supervised visit with our biological mother, or these week-long visits with our dad, it was pure chaos. And my siblings all knew each other, and I didn't know any of them, because I was 2 months old when we went into an orphanage, and then from there to foster care. So it was basically like almost like a newborn. So they all knew each other. They were much older. I didn't know them. They didn't know me. And so they would just like kind of, we would be dumped off together when we visited our mom only a few hours and her dad a week. But I just had no idea how to process any of it. So all that to say, just even in like reading the FOIA docs from his divorce case with Lori, I had to stop reading them because it was just so sad. And it wasn't until we were estranged, I talked about this before, that I came across the book, The Body Keeps the Score. I think that's what it's called. The Body Keeps the Score. And that book was truly revolutionizing. Like, if you experienced a lot of trauma, especially in childhood, it's a very kind of academic, scientific approach, but I think that's part of the reason that the book was able to kind of, penetrate all of my like guards and stuff. But I remember, even when I was reading the book, like I would write notes. So this was before Kindle and stuff, but I would write notes about, like, this is me, this is his family, this is a family member, this is his family member, this is Joe, and but anyway, so yeah, so if I wrote a book, it would probably really be more focused on foster care, with maybe some mentions of the case. But if I do like kind of a self-produced documentary, it will most likely be video. So Chris HQQQ asks, do you really think Lori will have the ability to present a case? Cosmetology isn't law. So, interestingly, and I may be a little one against the wind on this, yes. So I think she's going to really struggle with like the technicalities, like the law, like, well, what she can actually object to, what she can't. But so did John Pryor. And I mean no disrespect to John Pryor, but it was clear from his objections that, there were times he just wasn't familiar with the law. And at times you heard, kind of borderline irritation in Judge Boyce's responses, just like he almost seemed mystified. So I think we'll be more aware of how little she knows, because we know that she has no legal training. But what she does have, that most defendants don't have, unless you have like a Johnny Cochran, but is, one, she has intimate knowledge of the case. And then again, going back to my initial point, like when I have a client and I'm working on a project, I'm typically juggling other projects, and I'm juggling, like products that I'm building for analytics and things like that. So anything that I focus on, I'm managing a lot of other focal points, and not to an irresponsible level, except when I was in school and managing cancer school in this case. That was crazy. I probably should have held off on school, um, but yeah, just living this life, you're managing a lot of other things. Lori is in a vacuum. And the fact that she has been largely abandoned by, ostensibly by her family, friends, that is a lot of time to just focus on this case. Like, think about if you had 5 years of nothing else to do except, eat 3 times a day, shower, maybe go outside. She couldn't even go outside when she was in Rexburg, but because there was no place for them to go. But, like, she has nothing else to do. Like, who knows how much information she has consumed during this time. So I don't know. Because I don't have enough information to be able to make an assessment, because I don't know, like, is someone on the outside sending her books? Is she consuming these books? Is she, like, I saw, at least it appeared that John Thomas was writing out questions he was going to ask while the prosecution was questioning someone, or like while that person was on the stand. Now, sometimes it makes sense that you would have an extemporaneous question that came up and you'd write it down, but he was writing a lot. And I wondered, and I mean, no disrespect to John Thomas, but I wondered, is he like kind of doing this on the fly, but Lori has nothing but time. We don't know what John Thomas is, how many cases he was juggling, and family, and things like that. Lori has nothing else to juggle, so she has a lot of time to think through every question she wants to ask each of these witnesses. And I would not be surprised if she doesn't already have a lot of those written out, because she has a lot of weaknesses. But one of the strengths that I saw in her was she did tend to be quite organized. So I could imagine, especially when you combine her obsessive tendencies, her drive to show the world that she's not this dumb bimbo who is just following a dork who wears, dark socks and New Balance, sneakers and clothes that don't match. She's her own person. And so I don't know. I mean, it could run the gamut. Like, it could be borderline hilarious because she's grossly unprepared and she's so arrogant that she thinks she's just going to be able to get up there and ask whatever questions. Or she could come in with a pretty, tightly organized case, so I don't know. It's anyone's guess, but at minimum, it will be supremely interesting. And I think we're going to get we're going to get answers to a lot of questions that haven't been answered to date. So, B. Bunny Bailey, is it possible that Lori could call you as a witness? No, I don't think so. My interactions with her and the family predated these murders by more than a year. So no. I mean, even when I was interviewed by Rexburg police, like, the detective who interviewed me, he was so sweet. Like, he was just a really, really nice person, very easy to talk to. But he like actually apologized that he wasn't like a known name, almost like, oh, sorry that like Rexburg Police's B team. He didn't say this, but he was like, oh, um, you know, sorry, I know you probably don't know who I am. And I was like, I don't see myself as a celebrity in this case. And it makes sense that, like, I think everyone knows I'm not going to be able to provide any kind of useful information. Backstory, sure, but I mean, my longest conversation was with an FBI agent. But yeah, so no, I just think I'm way too tangential to the case. This Idaho mom reports asked, what do you think of Lori using her experience in family court with Joe as past legal experience? In my honest opinion, this is interesting for a lot of reasons. Yeah, someone asked me what I thought, yeah, or like if I guess she referenced like there was a bench case and two jury cases. I didn't listen to the the hearing, but yeah, so someone asked me if I thought the bench case was in reference to the trial with Joe, and yeah, I think it is. But yeah, I mean, she and Joe were in family court for years, and then she was in family court with Charles in his divorce case. So, excuse me. Sorry, I had no warning. So yeah, she's had a lot of experience manipulating the court system, but that doesn't mean that gives her any kind of credibility. And yeah, but I think I mean, she could have said just about anything. I think the judge would have been hard pressed to say, no, you can't represent yourself, because she was deemed competent to stand trial. So, yeah. Um, uh, but yeah, I thought that was mildly interesting, because it's like, yeah, that's on par with Lori. And I think we're going to, I do think that she is going to find ways to try to put Joe on trial in this trial. That would be very self-serving. That would be an attempt to try to exculpate herself, at least to the jury. But yeah, yeah, that experience did not qualify her. Now, if she, like I said, if she is studying the law and and defense strategies and stuff, that could qualify her. And I think the thing that qualifies her the most is that she knows this very complicated case inside and out. Okay. Ellen, question, sorry, just came, so maybe you've already addressed this, but I presume Lori will be part of jury selection. Won't that be dicey? Oh, absolutely. Isn't she pretty good at reading people she can manipulate? Yes. I suspect she's going to want more males than females on the jury. I mean, who knows? Who knows? But I also think, like, people who want to be on a jury like this, it's kind of interesting, because they can also manipulate. Like, if they really, really want to be on a high profile jury like this, they could be like, nah, I've never heard of Lori Vallow, like, I think my wife mentioned her back in 2020, or a friend at work said something, but I didn't follow the case. And for all we know, they could have been following everything for years, as long as they didn't join a Facebook group and they weren't on Reddit and like making public comments. Who's going to know? Oh, excuse me. So I think some people will manipulate to try to get out of jury duty, but some people will manipulate to be selected as a jury, So someone could be like, I want this chick to fry, but I just want to see all of her craziness up close and personal. And they could act like, really empathetic, and then, the player gets played. And I do suspect there will be some people who try to get on the jury by doing that. Oh, Jeff Chu. Oh, dude. Hey, Jeff. Would you consider doing a Q&A every week? So interesting. Thank you. I did. I think I might have done weekly Q&As for a while, but since this could be going on for quite some time, I do really want to be sensitive to my mods. Like I can honestly say, like, they have never complained. I know people say things like that because they're just being corny and sentimental, but I don't say things like that. I'm just not wired that way. My mods have never complained to me. That doesn't mean that they've never complained, but they've never complained to me about like, hey, you want to slow down, or like, we didn't really sign up to be in this for years. I have told them, on occasion, like, hey, like, no one is, what's the word I'm looking for? No one is obligated to keep doing this. You didn't sign up for this, to be a mod for such a protracted period of time. That said, I do want to be sensitive to their time. So that's why I'm doing it every other week. And then, when both of Lori's trials were vacated, I was like, oh gosh, like, now who knows when this case is going to go to trial. And I wasn't even sure I could like keep this up. Excuse me. Although I do have to say, I really enjoy these Q&As because it's like the only time I really get with the community. And so I think there's a little bit of a symbiotic nature to it, but I think we'll probably stick to every other week. Like I said, because of getting sick and then having Thanksgiving, I think it ended up being a month. So sorry about that, but yeah. But there are times where like, it's like the off Friday and I'm like, oh, bummer. I'd really like to get to hang out with the community. Okay, so I haven't read this ahead of time, but I do trust Dr. K. Annie, I'm about 5 minutes behind, but I've got to tell you something. I just heard what you said about writing a foster care book. I just wrote a children's book about a little boy in foster care. Oh, if you could share those details, I would love to see it. I mean, well, one thing that I absolutely love about social media is it's really amplified the voices of foster kids. Like, there are foster kids who are on TikTok, they're on Instagram, people who have come out of foster care. Like, when I was in foster care, I mean, it didn't help that my name was Annie, and so I was getting called Orphan Annie. Excuse me. Which were fighting words. I would just immediately take the person down. But it was so new that there was so much shame. Like, I remember kids probably still ask stupid questions like this to other foster kids, but it was like, why didn't your parents want you? Like, why did they get rid of you? And at that time, at least in the small town that I was in, like, we didn't even have divorced families. I remember this girl moving to our little small town, and her parents were divorced. She lived with her mom, and we were like, whoa, that's so wild, So, to have like, and well, and for me, it was painfully obvious that I was a foster kid because my foster parents were so old. So people would ask, "Are those your grandparents?" And I was always like, "No," because I didn't want to be associated with them at all. I was like, but so it was like I always had to say, "No, they're my foster parents." So I do love that this shame of foster care is really being dialed back. That doesn't mean that foster kids aren't suffering. They are, anytime you have a system where you have people who are like, they treat being a foster parent like, like a side gig. There are, I'm sure, very, very good foster parents out there, I'm sure. Uh, but um, but yeah, I mean, kids are still suffering, but I do love that there is a lot more visibility and a lot more resources. So one of the things I hope to do is use AI to build an app for specifically for foster kids and former fosters of just like all of the resources, like there are scholarships that are specifically for foster kids or even people who were in the foster care system for a while. Excuse me. So, but a lot of times kids coming out of foster care, they don't know about these things. Like no one's necessarily telling them. But anyway, so yeah, it's yeah, that is fascinating. And she asked, "How are you?" I am doing very, very well. Like uh, passing the finish line of school, cancer, and this case, all within like months of each other, was really amazing. Like I really feel like I have like a new lease on life. I mean, I was a pretty positive person, but until this case, 2020, I was not a positive person. I was sarcastic. I was angry. I was being harassed by so many trolls. I was reactive and stuff. But before 2020 and after, a pretty positive person. But yeah, it's just been really nice to be like, okay, all these projects that I've wanted to do, now I'm doing them, and I'm like releasing apps and innovating and doing a lot of programming and stuff. So things that just make me really happy. So I'm not just putting my best foot forward. Like that is, I mean, we all have our moments, but for the the most part, more than the most part, I am doing very, very well. Thank you for asking. Rachel, do you have thoughts about Lori cross-examining her mom, sister, and brother? That could be interesting information. I really want to know more from Summer. She knows a lot. Yeah, so of the three of them, I I don't I don't know. I I kind of doubt they're going to put Janice on the stand. I think she's just too unpredictable. The prosecution knows she's not going to turn on Lori. But then Lori also knows there is a chance my mom might not help my case. And I mean no disrespect to Janice. She was always very nice to me and to my family, but some of the things that she said were just so off. Like she didn't even realize how hilarious she was being. Like the point that she made about, you know, like Alex's funeral, which they didn't have a funeral. They just got together at, I think, Sulema's house. But that they didn't invite anyone who believed he was a murderer. So it was a small, precious group of people who loved him. You know, something to that effect. And I'm like, even when I was watching it, like I had to rewind because I was like, did she just say that? Like she basically was like, everyone thinks that Alex is a murderer, even his own family. So I just don't know that she would be a reliable witness. Summer and Adam, right? Absolutely. I think they will both be called by the prosecution. I doubt that Lori is going to call them as witnesses, because I doubt that they would make a case for her. One thing I do hope to find out is why Detective Moffat was so worried about Kay talking to Adam. So I've talked about this in other lives, but he said to Kay that Adam may have called Lori after talking to Charles. And this is my hot take on it. For him to call Kay 3 times, and he was so desperate to get a hold of Kay that he told her brother, I think it was Bobby, I think he was the one he interviewed, like, I've been trying to get a hold of Kay, so, but I can't get a hold of her, so if you talk to her, please tell her this. And Bobby, he is one of my favorite people who was interviewed by police. He was like, oh, I'll I'll tell her not to talk to him again or something like that. I mean, he is just so like, and really, truly, a spade is a spade. But anyway, so, but for Detective Moffat to say that Adam may have called Lori after talking to Charles, one, he wasn't like unsure of that detail. Like, I think I might have seen a text or, cell phone evidence that he called Lori right after talking to Charles. Like, he wasn't like, I'm not really sure, because he wouldn't have called Kay 3 times to warn her not to trust Adam. Like, he was delicate, because he was like, something like he may not be trustworthy, and he may have called Lori after talking to Charles. Well, I suspect what he saw was that Adam's phone made a call to Lori's phone. So can he say definitively Adam called Lori? No, because he didn't have a record. He didn't have, like, the call wasn't recorded. He didn't have evidence. So they have to be very careful, like, even throughout these trials. Like, like John Pryor would say, well, isn't it true that, Miss Vallow called my client, and like the detectives would be like, a call was made from Miss Vallow's phone to the defendant's phone, because they don't know, anyone could have picked up that phone and made the call. So anyway, so like, I think that's why he said Adam may have called Lori after talking to Charles. So anyway, so I do, again, I don't want to be cruel. I don't want to take any kind of delight in, how these different family members and friends must be suffering at this point. But there are questions that I still have that I think may be answered when Adam takes a stand. Now, we don't know who has, they probably haven't even sent out subpoenas at this point, but we don't know who's going to be called by either side. But I am quite confident Adam will be called because he was right there. So, and he was in touch with Charles, and clearly he is willing to testify against Lori. Given like his podcast and stuff like that. So, yeah, it should be interesting. As far as Summer, man, that is another one that will be extremely interesting. I find it incredibly suspicious that she and her family took off the morning Charles was murdered. Again, that is a solid Cox family tradition. But then, and I've talked about this in other lives, excuse me, the fact that she texted Alex anything yet. Like, there's no record, there's no evidence that she texted Lori or called Lori or was like, even asked Alex, is Lori okay? Because ostensibly, Lori was supposedly worried that Charles was going to murder her. But Summer expresses no concern for Lori, and neither does Melanie Gibb. Melanie's like, oh, I didn't even know for 4 days or whatever it is, which is ridiculous. But it's like, oh, really? So you're telling us that Lori told you you needed to leave because Charles was going to murder her. She's supposedly your bestie, and you didn't check in to see how she was doing? Like, that's ridiculous. Like, these people aren't even good at their lives. So similarly, Summer doesn't text Lori that we know of, are you okay? We may find out something to the opposite at the trial, but I think that would have been included most likely in the FOIA docs. But there's no evidence that like Summer showed any kind of like sincere concern for Lori. She texted Alex anything yet, as if she somehow knew that there was a plan. And I do suspect that Summer was at Lori's on July 9th because of Lori's text to Melanie Gibb. My whole family is here with all the kids, and something, I think she said something about it being like chaos. But, oh yeah, Lori responds, all my family and the kids are here, so it's chaos right now. And so who would all the kids have been? Not Melanie Pulowski's, or at that time, Melanie Boudreau's, because Lori was texting Melanie saying she couldn't go to the wedding. So why would Lori be texting Melanie saying she can't go and Melanie responding if she was right there in her living room? So that's 4 kids out of the picture. So, and Colby only had 1 child, and she was a baby, so that's 1 child. And then there's Summer's kids. Like, I don't know what other kids would have been there. But so I do suspect we are going to find out who was at her house July 9th, which is when this whole murder appears to have been planned. And also, who was at the pool party? So, I think that there are going to be a lot of details. And I think we could find out more about, Summer's involvement. Even, I actually just thought of this. Like, if Summer was the mysterious woman in the ring cam footage in Idaho, in Rexburg on like October 29th or whatever that was, the slender brunette, or she appeared to be brunette, who was enthralled with the igloo and, sounded just like Lori when they both laughed. It sounded like Lori in stereo. I suspect we will find out who that woman was, because if it was Summer, God help her, because that means she was in Rexburg, Idaho, more than a month after both of the kids were murdered. And clearly, again, if this was Summer, she didn't seem to be bogged down with like a lot of heaviness, like, so yeah, that calls into question like her whole, prison call, the recorded call, and acting so shocked and stuff, because there's just, yeah, that will, so anyway, and I do suspect I'm getting a little tangential now, but I think I mentioned this in another live, but I was thinking about it, and like, her testifying and stuff. The prosecution knew that we've been bandying about this question of if Summer was the person in the Ring camera footage, or in the Ring camera, I guess footage, for 4 years now. So there was every opportunity for like Rob Wood could have asked her, have you ever been to Rexburg, Idaho? Like that would have just answered that. I mean, not that it would have been particularly germane to the case, but like, I'm just saying, like, if anyone was like, oh, this poor woman, she's really being treated unfairly, let's just take this opportunity to clear the record. Nope, there was nothing. And then she had the interview with Nate, and at CrimeCon, and he wasn't going to ask her about that, of course, but he asked her if there was anything she wanted to, I forget how he put it, but like something like clear the air on, or set the record straight. So there was her golden opportunity to say, yeah, I would have been like, yeah, for all the fools saying I was in Rexburg, I have never traveled to Rexburg, Idaho. She was like, no, people will believe, whatever they're going to believe. I was like, this does not bode well. Like, there has not been a single thing that she has said or anyone else has said that has like thrown me off this scent. Now that doesn't mean that she was the person in the Ring camera footage, but it's, yeah, but anyway, so all that to say, to make a short story very long, I would love for her to be asked if she ever traveled to Rexburg. And if anyone is well suited to ask that question, it'll be Lori, especially if Summer has abandoned her. Okay, one more question, and then I'm going to call it a night. Bayou B. Just a second, let me get a drink. Do you know who would have the authority to obtain Tylee's medical records? I've always been curious to know the dates and how many times poor Tylee had to be hospitalized for Tylee's pancreatitis. Whoops. I've speculated that her pancreatitis probably stopped when they adopted JJ. I believe JJ, being special needs, appealed to Lori. Just my opinion, but I think she needed the praise for caring for... yeah, it cut off. That's like a buy one get 3 free. I don't think, given HIPAA laws, I don't know if HIPAA laws apply to someone who has passed. I've thought about that. If anyone, I think it would have to be pertinent to the case. And if that was ever going to happen, it would have been the case, the trial for Tylee's murder. Now, it's just, I mean, it really wouldn't have even been that pertinent to Tylee's trial unless the defense had tried to make a case of, Lori spent years caring for a sick daughter and, oh, excuse me. Obviously she wouldn't murder that daughter, but they didn't go down that path. So I just don't, I don't know if anyone would have the authority to do that because, one parent is incarcerated, the other parent is dead. But I don't even know if anyone would be inclined to do that. I think you would, like, someone would basically probably have to hire a private investigator who will, like, ask around, poke around in the Cox family's business to try to put together those cases. But those hospitalizations. But yeah, I don't really see anyone chasing down that information. Personally, I suspect that Lori was a poster child for oh my gosh, what is that called? Something by proxy. Is late. I can't. I'm blanking on the term. Munchausen's by proxy. So I suspect that whole thing was most likely Munchausen's. That said, I've talked about how, like, Lori fed her kids junk. At least when I was there, and apparently Colby talked about that too, with, like, talking about his weight struggles. And so who knows how much diet played into some of Tylee's maladies, but I don't know. I just think that Lori has the profile of someone who would be intentionally making their child sick for the attention, for the adulation, and also to somewhat distance herself from Tylee's weight. Because if she could make everyone believe that she just has this sickly child and she's just doing everything she can just to keep Tylee alive and stuff, that could somewhat, like, help her explain why she doesn't take better care of her kids. She was like, whatever would be the female equivalent of, like, a Peter Pan dad. She was like Peter Pan, but as a mom, she always wanted to be the cool mom, the one who said yes. She was very permissive, and then would marry men who she would get to do her bidding, like handle the discipline and things like that, and so that then she could be the comforter and all of that. So yeah, I just and I think also she wanted Joe to suffer, so Tylee being in the hospital, she would use that as a reason for why Tylee couldn't go to her dad's. Like, when he would have, like, was supposed to have time during the holidays or summers, this was one of the excuses, if memory serves me correctly, that she would use why Tylee couldn't go. And they were just constantly going back to court. I've talked about this before, but, like, when I was in touch with Joe was very wealthy, and so, I mean, he eventually, like, died like a pauper's death. He it was very obvious he had just moved into that apartment, wasn't in a good part of the city, and yeah, so I think she just absolutely drained him emotionally, psychologically, and financially, because he had to spend so much time and money defending himself, keeping himself out of prison. But yeah, I mean, if it hadn't been for Colby slipping up and making claims that were physically impossible, there's a good chance Joe would have gone to prison for the P word, for being a PEDO. And, like once you're convicted of that, like who is going to believe that there's a chance, even a modicum of a chance, that you're not guilty? It would have absolutely destroyed him. And I also mentioned this, like when I was reading through those FOIA docs before, I just had to stop because it was so unbelievably sad. But the detective, I think her name was like Skoricki or something like that. She, this person, oh no, it wasn't the FOIA docs. It was the notes that someone who had been involved in that investigation passed on to me. And this person had noted that the detective said, we just need to go and pick him up. Like they were that close. And then it was I can't think of her name, Vivian. I think she was the one who said, let me interview Colby before you pick him up. Let me interview Colby. So yeah, it's, yeah, I don't really know where to go with that, but I do suspect part of, if she was indeed purposely making Tylee sick, I suspect that part of her motivation was just to make Joe suffer, to make him feel as helpless as possible, because she was in unbelievable psychological warfare. I mean, there's no question in my mind. She is either a psychopath or a sociopath. And I learned throughout the course of this case, psychopaths are born, sociopaths are made. So a sociopath, may go through like really significant trauma and then eventually choose to become the aggressor and, just really kind of like dulls their conscience and stuff. Whereas a psychopath is, they say psychopaths are born, and they've like studied the brain scans of even like children who, well, I'm very hesitant to call a child a psychopath, but so I'll just say children who have exhibited a psychopathic behavior, and they found, the difference, like pretty significant differences between the brains of these kids with psychopathic tendencies and kids who presented as, more emotionally healthy. But anyway, so I don't know if she was made or became one, but reading through those records, especially the notes that were passed on to me, I mean, it is like her level of cruelty. Obviously, like it got so much worse because she was willing to have her own daughter, like, murdered and done everything that they did to her body. And then again, a special needs little boy. Like, you have to be off the charts, to sign off on that. But anyway, okay. That's enough for tonight. This has been long even for me, but I enjoyed hanging out with you. Regardless of the darkness of the topic, and hopefully we'll see each other in a couple. Well, wait a minute. No, I don't know, because a couple weeks will be the 20th That might be too close to Christmas, but we'll figure something out. Anyway, if I don't talk to you before Christmas, have a wonderful, wonderful holiday. But I don't know. Maybe we'll fit something in next week or something. I don't know. Anyway, have a great night. Have a great weekend. Bye.